Well, thanks, Mark, for the lovely intro. It's always great to have you stateside when you can make it. So a little bit, if you've, I'm assuming that in the SQL world, there's not a whole lot of people who have played around with Jupyter Notebooks yet. I have heard from a number of people asking me, like, what is it? What do I use that for? And why should I care? Don't I do this in Visual Studio? So what I want to do is kind of show you what Jupyter Notebooks is, why you might want to use it for an R and Python, and get you started with making it work. There's ways of doing it. You don't even have to install anything. So we'll go over all those options for you and also review a little bit of Python and R so you can see how it works with those two languages. All right, a little bit about me. I'm the principal consultant at Desert Isle Group. As Mark said, I have a blog at Desert Isle SQL, and I'm on Twitter at desertisleSQL.com, which is a pretty good way of getting a hold of me. But if you happen to be in either New Zealand, Brisbane, or Columbus, Ohio, I'm going to be there as well for SQL Saturdays and for pre-cons for machine learning with SQL Server. In South Islands, that's in Christchurch, and also in Brisbane, and in Columbus, Ohio, with it doing a session on advanced Power BI. So we might want to check those out, and then I can see you in person. A little bit about today's agenda. Today we're going to be talking about some of the use cases for Jupyter Notebooks. We'll talk about the different ways that you can install it and use it. We're going to be looking at using Jupyter Notebooks in Azure, because there are reasons that you may not want to install anything on your machine. I've talked to people recently, and for security reasons, I know a lot of companies are now decreasing people's hard drives, making it very difficult to install anything because they just don't have the space. So you do not have to install anything to use Jupyter Notebooks. You can use it all in the cloud, and for free, absolutely free. So we'll talk about how to do that, and then talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I really like this tool, but let's face it, no tool's perfect, and I want to let you know what the pluses and minuses are so that when you are selecting a tool, you will understand what it does and doesn't do for you. So a little bit about Project Jupyter. Project Jupyter is the umbrella that Jupyter Notebooks exists in. You may have wondered, isn't there something called IPython? If you were thinking about that, then congrats, you know where it started. So originally, IPython was created as an interactive library for writing Python code. But as more and more people used it, they said, you know what, this would be kind of cool if I use this with R, or if I use this with Julia, or if I used it with Go. So they modified the application a little bit. And as it was a web application, it wasn't too bad to do. It is an open source application, and they broke it up so that you can use it now for a number of different coding languages. So what it has a user interface and then a number of different kernels. And the kernels that you install or access will allow you to use different languages with it. So that you can use a number of different languages. This is only some of them that are available to you if you like the user interface, or if you want to use a single user interface for documentation. And once you take a look at it, you might understand why you might want to do that. So within the entire Jupyter framework, there's a number of different applications within it. Jupyter Labs is basically a container for all of your project work, which they just announced it a little earlier, late last year, so it's still in beta, but it's a method of providing an organization for folders and documents for your code. Jupyter Console is the terminal front end, and this will allow you to use just a text-based front end, and the console can be installed with pip, which is used to install Python applications. The Qt console is a lightweight application that feels a lot like a terminal, but it provides a number of enhancements that in a GUI, such as like inline figures and multi-line editing with syntax highlighting, and it can be used with any Jupyter kernel. And then there's Jupyter Hub. Jupyter Hub integrates with cloud computing to allow it to use with Kubernetes. So it is containerizing your code. And then lastly, with the project that we're going to talk about, which is Jupyter Notebooks. And Jupyter Notebooks is a web-based application that will allow you to document your code, look at the results, and have all that information in one place. So if you want to install it, you do, because it was originally based and it is written in Python, you do have to have Python installed, either Python 2.7 or something above 3.3. If you have not installed Python on your machine yet, I highly recommend that you install version 3, whichever the latest version of version 3 is when you're installing it. And the reason why is 2.7 was replaced with version 3 in 2008. And as it has been 10 years, they're finally getting around to making version 2 completely deprecated. So if you've not installed anything before, make sure you install Python 3. The other thing that you get into when you are installing Python, and this is just one of those things about Python, is it asks you to install the Anaconda distribution. And Anaconda is an environment that we'll talk about in a little while, that you will get Python, a whole bunch of other tools for Python in addition to Jupyter Notebooks. If you are just installing if you just want Jupyter Notebooks, it's a little bit overkill to install the whole thing, but if you are going to be coding Python, especially if you are going to be doing anything with machine learning, you probably will want the Anaconda distribution, which is what I have installed. If you just want to do the quick and dirty lightweight install, once you've got Python installed, if you just use this pip command to install Jupyter, that will just install Jupyter Notebooks for you. So a little bit about the Anaconda distribution. There are two different versions of the Anaconda distribution, Anaconda and Miniconda. Anaconda is the very large environment. It takes over 300 meg to install it, and at least 40 minutes, even if you have a decent internet connection, because it just installs a ton of softwares and downloads over 250 scientific packages for Python. It installs all of these packages so that you don't have to do it again. Miniconda installs a lot less information. It doesn't install every package under the sun. It's so that if you need the libraries later, you have to install it, which is why it's called Miniconda. It doesn't install all of the Python components. Now, if you already have Python installed, don't worry about it. You can install the icon distribution as well. It will, it plays well in sandboxes with others. It basically creates its own container, so it won't break your existing Python installation. The Anaconda distribution includes a lot of different libraries and systems. This is their information about it. It includes scikit-learn, pandas, TensorFlow, SciPy, PyTables, and Django, Airflow, Spark, and it contains all these different components. Anaconda was run by a company called Continuum Analytics, and it's what you call freemium software. It is open source. It is, you can fork it in GitHub if you have the mind to go ahead and modify it, but they also have an enterprise version which they want to charge you money for. Again, you don't have to buy the enterprise version. To be honest, I don't know anybody who has. And you can just use the Anaconda version that is the freemium version, not the enterprise version. Anaconda has a number of different partners. You'll notice that on their top list there is Microsoft. Anaconda created the distribution of Python that ships with SQL Server 2017, but it does not include Jupyter Notebooks. So if you're interested in Jupyter Notebooks, even if you have 2017 installed, you will still need to install the distribution. So they have created a number of different distributions. The strength of Anaconda is its libraries, is the fact that it provides everything for you. So it gives you an environment that has everything you need available to you so that you can get started working with it. The company used to be called Continuum, but because everybody knew them by their name Anaconda, they just changed their name to Anaconda. So it's not called Continuum anymore. The company is just called Anaconda. And if you want to look at all the packages, they do have a repo Continuum. The previous company name has got all the packages that they have available for you if you wanted to go ahead and take a look at that. So okay, so now that I've talked a lot about the Jupyter Notebooks, time to actually take a look at it. So, and when I do this, let me change the screen here real quick. So when I load up Jupyter Notebooks, since it is a web application, what I do is I open up a command prompt. And in this command prompt, I type Jupyter Notebook. Now, one thing when you look at documentation that is provided for Anaconda or for anything that's open source just about, they seem to just assume that everybody is running on Linux. If you try to run that Jupyter Notebook prompt in a standard command prompt, you will get an error. I did not get an error, and the reason why is I'm using the command prompt that ships with Anaconda to run this. And the reason that it works in that prompt and not in a standard Windows prompt is because with Windows you are limited in what the path can contain by the number of characters, and generally speaking it's just not it's not available in the path to be able to access Jupyter Notebooks, which is why you need to use the Anaconda prompt and not the regular prompt. And when I first started, I didn't know that and blew about 30 minutes trying to figure out why the heck a simple command wouldn't work. So save yourself some time and don't do that. So when you have it loaded, what happens is you get this website loads. So this is obviously localhost 88, which is what loaded when I typed Jupyter Notebooks in that prompt. And this shows me all of my files and what is running and what clusters that I have. So this is just a very, obviously I'm running in a web page, just whatever browser you happen to want to use is what it is how it operates. So let's go ahead and actually just create up a new Jupyter Notebook so that you can get a look at exactly what I'm talking about. So I've got a couple of distributions here. I've got a distribution for Python 3 and for R. I could obviously load a whole bunch more kernels, but frankly I don't care about the other kernels, so I didn't load them. And I can also do text files and folders. But for this illustration, let's go ahead and do Python 3. So this is going to load up a notebook for me. And it's telling me that my kernel is starting, please wait. And then it's a trusted connection, and I have this little pencil here, which means that it's in edit mode. And when it's in edit mode, there's a green box around this little thing, which happens to be called a cell. These are called cells in Jupyter Notebooks. So with Jupyter Notebooks, I've got some little options here for what I want my cell to be. And I'm going to change my cell to Markdown. And the reason why is because I can do, if you're not familiar with Markdown, I highly recommend you get familiar with Markdown because Markdown is what's used in GitHub. So if you haven't started your own GitHub repository, I assume you're going to want one at some point in time. And it's just a very handy little language to know. It's not really much of a language, it's just how you format things, and it's how Jupyter Notebooks formats things as well. This is the run button, and when I run it, it takes off the little hashtags and puts it into a format. This is header 3, you can tell that by 3 hashtags, and if I do something like this, oops, I have to actually copy better since I'm too chicken to type during the middle of a presentation. And notice that this has got 6 hashtags in front of it. That means that this is going to be formatted as header 6. So as long as I don't have anything in front of it. Come on. Oop. To illustrate a point too, I also need to make sure that I have this defined as Markdown. And so when I do, it will format my code for me. So I have some things formatted, so let's actually get into looking at some code. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to load up some libraries. And if I couldn't remember what I installed, it's the Python 3 here, so that can remember that I do have the Python distribution loaded right now. So using a standard comment for Python, which is a hashtag, and I'm going to go ahead and import some libraries. So I'm just going to make a reference to the pandas and matplotlib libraries. And what I want to do is I want them to be work as inline. And when they work as inline, then I will be able to see them within my code environment here. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And it didn't do anything because loading some libraries is not terribly interesting thing for it to do, and it doesn't show me any output. So let's do some things that'll actually in a bit get us some information. So what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and load some data. And I'm going to load some data from an archive for UC Irvine. And that data is stored from the machine learning library. And I'm going to load a CSV file, and I'm going to make that CSV file into a pandas data frame. And that's what this step is doing. It's basically saying, load this file up. It's a CSV file. It doesn't have any headers, so these are my headers. And it does say that it's delimited by white space. So it's not comma delimited really, it's white space delimited. So it's a fixed width file. And these are my columns. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And let's actually take a look now at actually something that we can do. So I want to so I'm going to go ahead and put it in a comment here saying that I want to review the data. And I'm going to do that by printing the shape of the data and looking at the first 5 records. So if I do that, I can see that I have 406 rows of data, and I have 9 columns, and it's gone ahead and listed the first 5 of them here as my output. And notice it says the output and these two things are tied together, so I can see that this code gives me this output. And I've got a nice little graph here so that I can see what the heck that I'm going to analyze. So let's actually take a more in-depth look at our data set by creating some graphs. So visual data analysis. And I can do this so that later on when I can't remember what the heck this code is supposed to be doing or why I bothered, I have little headers in it so that I can see, what I was doing when I did my code here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and create a plot of the data that I have, looking at a combination of the displacement and the miles per hour, and just miles per gallon, excuse me, taking a look at that. And you see that it creates a little graph for me showing the miles per gallon and the displacement and how those two items relate. So if I go ahead and import a couple more libraries, I can do some more fancy charts. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to look at creating a histogram with Seaborn. And you'll see here that now I've got a little histogram looking at my miles per gallon and the frequency of each item in my data set. So I could also looking at doing something, looking at miles per gallon and weight using Seaborn instead of Matplotlib. And it also drew a line for me looking at the relationship, so looking to see what kind of linear progression I have in relation to weight and miles per gallon here. And then I can do something fun like creating a joint plot. I often get asked, because I do a lot with Power BI, well, you know, what else could you, why would you want to do different kinds of stuff in other tools, because you can do so much in Power BI. Well, I couldn't do this in Power BI. I will also say that while Microsoft is working on a integrating Python with Power BI, which they announced in their ideas section, it's not there yet, but you can do the same thing in R. So it just gives you an idea that I could do, that I can do a histogram, combine that with a with my scatter chart, and looking at the distribution of miles per gallon and weight, in addition to having a scattergram. And then I'm just going to take a look at doing a side box plot, just to be fancy, of my miles per gallon, so I can see the distribution there. I'm looking at the various quartiles and the mode here. And then I can look at, say, doing a violin plot too. Sideways, just for fun. So now that I have this, what I can go ahead and do is I've got this file. This file contains everything that I have here. So I can go ahead and give this a new name, because untitled is the world's dumbest name. So I'm going to call this car Python analysis. I'll rename that. And then I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, I didn't have, it saves every, I believe it's 65 seconds, something like that. So I have this information already, but what I have when I'm done is if I go back to my list here, I see that I have a file that I just created called IPYNB. And this is currently located in a subdirectory called Jupyter. And this is in my documents file. So I could go ahead and copy this out of here and email this to somebody, and when I do, it contains this file. And it is running right now because I just ran it. I could also stop it as well. So this is all done on my machine. I'm not going out to the web. This is localhost, and I've created myself a little file here that contains not just my code, but documentations and visualizations, so that I have all that. What I can also do is, if I don't want like this, I can, of course, download this as a Python file. And when I save this file, I'm going to save it here. And when I do that, I get a file that looks something like this. It gives my little in to show me where my little blocks are. But I still could open this up and run this within Python. So I get a file for it if I want to, but I also have the ability to look at it in this format, so that I have all of my graphs and analysis. If you are doing a lot with machine learning, people are really interested in seeing all of your visualizations, and it's kind of convenient to have it all there with your code, and this provides you the ability to go ahead and have all of that in one place. So what I just showed you was the install for Anaconda. Again, that was all running locally, but you don't necessarily have to do it that way, and we'll look at some other ways of running Jupyter Notebooks as well. So as you saw when I just demoed it, Jupyter Notebooks contains your code, your results from running your code, any documentation that you choose to create, whether you use Markdown and comments within code, which is the combination that I think looks best. It also contains a kernel launcher. A kernel launcher will allow you to select from any of the kernels that you have installed. How you install different kernels depends on the language. When I installed R, I did that all from within my RStudio, and not from within Python. I needed to download the libraries within RStudio to run it, and that was all I needed. Interesting note about the R distribution, it is not part of CRAN R because they've not been certified. So don't look for it there, you won't find it. And when you are done writing a Jupyter notebook, you'll get this transportable file, IPYNB, and you can email those files, pass them around, and allow anybody to access them. Now, the beauty of using this with Anaconda is that I have all of those libraries installed, so I didn't need to go ahead and install them again. If you give them to somebody else who, say, has Miniconda installed, they would their screen would be a little bit different when they ran it because it would need to install the libraries that you referenced. So I know that you just saw me looking at this, but I also know that I tend to go kind of fast, so I wanted to take some time to just look at the user interface to tell you what options are available and what you can do with it. So file, this is where you would do a download, copy, rename, any of that kind of stuff is done within file. Edit is all about the cell manipulation. Oh, by the way, this is a cell, so you'll notice that I don't have a little pencil up here, so this is considered, and so this is not green, it's blue, so this is considered command mode. You can start typing in it and then you'll get the little pencil up here. So I could, with edit, I could can split my cells, move cells up or down, merge cells. View, all this does is allows you to turn on or off various menus and toolbars. Inserts has very few options. All it's about is where do you want that the new cell to go. Do you want it above where you have the cell highlighted or below it? Cells, instructions for running cells such as run all. So if you just want to run the whole thing, that would be within cell. And allows you to change the cell type, so whether or not it's code or it's a markdown, that would be done with here. Kernels, you can change languages. So you could actually have a document that had both R and Python code because in the individual elements you could change. Don't recommend that because it gets really confusing, but it's doable. And you would, if you do have to have the kernels installed first. Help provides the UI tour, keyboard shortcuts, and information on all the libraries that you have installed. And to help you out with that. So with these icons here, save does a save. It doesn't change any names. The plus actually will add a new cell. A cut will remove a cell. A copy will copy a cell. This will paste a cell. You can move cells up and down with this. And the most important button of all is this one, which is run. So if you want to run a cell, then you would click on this particular icon. This stops it. This refreshes. This will allow you to change whether or not it's code or markdown, and the typewriter shows you all the shortcuts, which are really pretty cool, that have available. And that's it. That's the entire user interface. Not terribly complicated, which is one of the really big strengths with this particular UI. It's really easy to pick up. There's pluses and minuses with that, though. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Markdown because I really think that everybody should know a little bit about Markdown because it's just getting to be so ubiquitous. So Markdown basically is all about the hashtags and running it. So it just formats things up once you've got them displayed. A pound gives you heading 1, 3 hashtags, heading 3. Square brackets around link would give you the link for the name and then the link behind it. Commonmark.org is where you would go to actually learn a little bit about Markdown, so that's why I put that there as well. Now, I did tell you that there is a way to use Jupyter Notebooks and not install any software and not pay anybody any money. So what I wanted to do is basically show you how you would do that. And I'm going to show you that by looking at doing it in the cloud. So how you would work with Jupyter Notebooks in the cloud is using the one free tool that is available in Azure. If Studio at azureml.net is absolutely free. Microsoft does not ask you for a credit card. You can do a whole bunch of things with it and never pay a dime for it. It's got a lot of other features and components involved in it that you could get into. I'm not going to today, but I really think it's cool, which is why I wrote a book, was part of the wrote a book on it. I did the certification book for Azure Machine Learning, but it's one thing that it has that's really cool that we will talk about today is the ability to create your own Jupyter Notebooks. And why not go ahead and do that? Because you can do this for free and install nothing. So if you are looking to just get started and you want to make sure that this is, you don't have much space in your hard drive and you have a big install and you don't want your environment screwed up, then this is a place for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into my experiments on this button here. This is what you'll see when you load into it, when you go into it initially, excuse me. And when I go into my experiments, now I don't want a tour. So I can't tell you how many times I've clicked on this too. Not now. All right, go away. So we'll see here that I have some options here on the left-hand side, and the option that we are interested in today is notebooks. So this will allow us to create a new Jupyter Notebook. It says it's in preview. It's been said that for like almost 2 years now, so it's pretty stable. I've never had any problems with it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this giant plus at the bottom of the screen to take a look at doing some new options. So in my new preview options, I do not have the ability to have every single possible kernel that's available, but I have Python and I have R, and since I just showed you Python, now we're going to go ahead and do something in R. So what I'm going to look at doing in R is I'm going to do some analysis of a movie database. So we'll go ahead and say that. You'll notice that this is the same interface that we just looked at before. Notice the options are the same. Everything about it is the same. You can change kernels, but the only difference is that adding new kernels is not something that's available to you in this interface. But if you want to do R or Python, then you're probably just fine. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I am going to go ahead and get some, well, let's actually, do some markdown and actually say what we're doing. So we're going to be doing movie database review analysis. And I can spell great. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run that. A little bit different is they actually give you the ability to run. So what I am going to do is I'm going to download 2 files that I'm going to work with. These files are currently loaded in my workspace, so I don't have to get them from a CSV. I could always get them from a CSV as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Again, nothing much going on there. But let's take a look at doing some analysis of my different rows in each data set. So let's do some markdown here. And if I just wanted to show you this just so you get an idea. Notice unless I hit run, this stays how it is. Only when I run it does it get formatted. So what I'm going to take a look at is looking at so I've got 2 different data sets there. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the first one, the ratings database, and then I'm going to go ahead and look at the titles data set. So I've got a movie ID, so hopefully they're in common. So I'm going to go ahead and merge these using the movie ID, and I'm going to then create one data set called movie data. So I have now my one data set that has both of the information in it so I can look at ratings and movie names. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to install another library, and it's installed a required package as well, so it knows about dependencies. And I want to, just in case I can't remember, I want to make sure I know what kind of object movie data is. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and find out, oh good, it's a data frame, just in case I couldn't remember. Well, let's take a look at some summary data for that data frame. And we can see the movie ID, the rating, the timestamp, the averages and means, quarterlies, quartiles, all the information about the ratings. Look like the mean rating is 7.3, but the median is 8, which is sort of interesting, out of 10. So most people are giving it an 8. Always sort of interesting. But let's take a look at perhaps looking at what that looks like. So go ahead and do a plot of that, and then I'm just going to be doing a histogram. I hope so. It's not going to do it now. I'll do it again. Oh, that's fun. Well, there we go. I'm a little bit too impatient. So it shows me the histogram movie data. You can see how that's broken out. You can see the fact that most of them are 8 and how they are organized. So just the same sort of thing. Now this is all in the Azure Cloud. So if I wanted to make it this, I can go ahead and download this. I can download it as a notebook so that I can load it up locally. And I could also just download it straight as R code. So I want to go ahead and do that just for fun. And Microsoft Edge blocked it. Thank you. And I'm going to go just do save as. And I'm going to put it in my Jupyter Notebooks subdirectory so that I could load it up there later. So I've got this saved. So also if I go back to my notebooks here, I see that I've got my movie analysis that's available to me as well. So I've got it available that I just downloaded it, and it's still here in Machine Learning Studio. And again, this is free. This is not going to cost you anything, and you can go ahead and learn R Python and use this tool to figure all that out. So kind of a neat way of doing it. There's very small differences in the user interface, like one says run, one doesn't tell you run, but it works fundamentally the same and allows you to do Jupyter Notebooks and not install anything, which can be kind of cool. So, cool things about Jupyter Notebooks. It contains the data to remind you what the code does. This can be really helpful if you are creating documentation that you are giving to a client as to the kind of analysis that you've done. It's helpful because it's nice to document your code and nobody ever does it after the fact. It's also interactive. You can run a cell at a time. You can run the whole thing. It's very easy to share. I could email all of the files that I just created to everybody here, and then they could have access to them. And it contains multiple environments for writing code. I know that a lot of people say, well, yeah, but you can do all of that in Visual Studio. Yes, you can, but nobody ever chooses Visual Studio being a lightweight application. But it does provide a very lightweight way of doing it, and it's open source, so you get into a little bit of that world as well. But there are some annoying things. Let's face it, nothing is perfect, and so you need to weigh what's important to you when you're doing your analysis. It doesn't have any IntelliSense. You actually have to know what the commands are. It's not going to help you out with that. So if you really, really, really like IntelliSense, use another tool. Most of your R and Python interfaces include a IntelliSense. RStudio does, Visual Studio does. I prefer PyCharms with Python, not Visual Studio, and they all include IntelliSense. You also don't really have any help. One thing that is kind of nice with most R and Python interfaces is if you're interested in getting help on a individual library or component, just want the syntax for the thing, you can, in the IntelliSense window, type a question mark and the command and get help with that. Now, that's not, that does not included in Jupyter Notebooks. So, hey, but that's what search engines are for. So, but if that's important to you, you don't want to use it. And then the markdown formatting is not immediate. Okay, this isn't that big of a deal, but it does kind of annoy me when it looks ugly. So, just some little things that can sort of, weigh your decisions one way or the other about whether or not to use it or not. But you aren't tied into it if you decide that you want to use Jupyter Notebooks and nobody else does. You can always save it as a native code file and you are out of Jupyter Notebooks. You are not wedded to it at all. So in summary, Jupyter Notebooks is a web-based UI for writing code in a number of different languages. There's more languages than I know what they are that are available in various kernels for it. Go and Julia being the two that I know are really hot on the development list right now. Code within it contains documentation and output. This is really helpful because let's face it, you don't necessarily remember everything about your data set, and it allows you to actually read over your code without having to run it to figure out what the heck you were doing. And it can be installed with Anaconda or used free from within Azure ML. So you have more than one way of accessing it and executing it, and either one of them can work. So with that, I wanted to leave some time for questions. I did include a couple of links here that I think you might find helpful. This commonmark.org help, this is for learning Markdown. If you don't know it, you really need to start. The Jupyter.org documentation gives you more information about Jupyter Notebooks. Studio@AzureML.net is where you can get a free, and I mean free, really truly free, way of doing Jupyter Notebooks, and of course my website at desertisleSQL.com. So Mark, do we have any questions?
Excellent, yeah. We have a few questions. The first one I'm going to ask is, whilst we can see that it's all free at AzureML.net, do you foresee that situation is going to change at some point?
No, I don't. And the reason why is if you looked at that initial screen, Microsoft is creating has created a new product. So they're not really doing a whole lot of modifications to AzureML.net. Okay. So I don't see that changing.
Okay. I mean, are there any limitations then in terms of the size of data sets you can bring in or data frames you can bring in?
There is a limitation of size, and the size is 10 gigs. So that is a limitation with BStudio AzureML.net. I really do think that it's a good place for evaluation, but if you really get into it, you're going to want to load it on your machine. But if you're just getting started and you're not sure if you even like it, that's a great way of try before you buy, and you're not invested in jacking your machine up to get started in how it all works.
Yeah. Okay, so a question here from F. Puma. Hopefully I'll read it correctly. Can I use the MMS-ML version with data on a local database? Is the data loaded into MS Cloud? So I'm suspecting he's asking if you can maybe use Azure Notebooks and drag stuff in from on-prem, if I'm reading that correctly.
You can, but if you do it on-prem, if you are trying to directly connect to a on-prem database, then you need to use a machine learning gateway.
Right.
And that is something you do have to pay for. So if you're gonna have to go that route, I recommend doing it with a local install.
Okay.
Or because you have to pay for it at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you quite early on you gave an example of saving the Jupyter Notebook as a Python file. I was actually interested whether once you've done that, whether it's possible to open that Python file back in as a Jupyter Notebook.
No, because it doesn't look right. I mean, this is pretty much the sample. Just ignore this bit. It gives you this thing that says in.
Yeah.
So you'd have to basically paste it in again.
Got
but
you.
this is what it looks like when you save it that way. So you could paste it all in and you can tell where they are because you have these little blocks, but you're kind of out
Yeah, yeah.
at that point.
Okay, I've just had a question come in from Morton. He says, I am working on a customer site where they have data in Oracle, SQL Server database, etc. Can I get data into the cloud? So I think that's similar to the question I asked
Right,
previously. I think the answer is yes, isn't it? But you still need the gateway.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
If you're going to be doing that, you probably are going to want to look at doing it locally.
Yeah, crazy people using Oracle. Um,
There you go.
right, so another question that sprung out to me was that you talked earlier about using Python 2.7, and was the other version's 3, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can't remember what the current version is. I think it's
Yeah.
3.4.
So my question is obviously you'd use 3 if you're starting afresh, but
Right.
is the only reason that you'd go to 2.7 now if you've got legacy code, or is there something else that we need to be aware of?
No, it's for legacy code because the two are incompatible.
Okay, cool.
So
I
if you
don't.
don't have legacy code, don't use it.
Yeah, sure. I don't know whether this question is going to make sense, but I'll try. So all the examples you showed were really static examples, so consuming data and then having a static graph. I wondered whether it's possible to consume some dynamic data and have dynamic graphs so they auto-update in line, maybe from a feed.
So is it possible to write Python code to dynamically input data to
So
Jupyter
the chart,
Notebooks?
yeah, so the charts automatically update in real time. Because that'd be pretty cool.
It would be pretty cool. I know you can do that. I don't think you can do that within Jupyter Notebooks. It's more of a batch system. If that's your goal, you're probably going to want to use a different interface.
Yeah, yeah. We've got Morton who's come back to us about the Oracle scenario. He says, what about installing the Oracle CX package in Studio Azure ML.NET?
You could still install it, but to be able to access the data, you're still going to need the gateway.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you basically, if you have Oracle, you must use the gateway. If you use the gateway, it's not free anymore.
Okay. Cool. All right, so one of the things that I see as a potential downfall of Jupyter Notebooks is the ability to make lots and lots of changes, moving cells around and all that kind of thing. I wondered, well, I hoped that there's an undo history.
Oh, honestly, there isn't.
Okay. Oh dear. Okay.
Yes, so you would need to, the files can be, they're straight up files, so you could put them in source control. And because they they look like text files to
Yeah.
a source control editor, you would be able to flag your differences.
So is that the general working practice that you would create a Jupyter Notebook, make some changes, and then push to source control once you're happy with that particular version? Is that how generally people work with Jupyter?
Yeah, you definitely want to check it in, or when you're going to hand it off to somebody.
Okay.
If you're working in a team environment, you're like, well, my bit's done, or I'm done for today, and then check it into whatever source control you happen to be using.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I heard somewhere that it's also possible to run Jupyter Notebooks as some sort of service, so that people, you can have multiple users accessing it. But I also heard there was potential security risk with doing so. Is there a good way to do that, or would you just say that people should just go to a cloud-based offering if they want to do something like that?
Well, it's a web page, so you could implement that kind of security on a server and, have logins and have multiple people doing it because it's just a service.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm running the service locally, obviously, but you don't have to. But then again, there isn't any security that's natively built into it, so you'd have to create it all.
Okay. Right, so yeah, what language would you recommend to use with Jupyter Notebooks? I'm guessing you're going to say Python.
Python and R if you're going to be sharing results out.
Okay.
If you're not, it also depends on the size of the project. Because if you're doing something that's super duper involved, that's why they created Jupyter Labs, because that gets to be helpful with organizing it. But when you start getting to have like really complex projects, it's kind of simple.
Yeah.
It's not really designed for doing that. But for simple like proof of concept stuff and or providing visualizations to clients, that's what I use it for.
Cool. So final question, I don't think we've got any more from anyone else. Final question from me is, what's the best way then to get started with Python?
I would install the Anaconda distribution.
Okay.
And if you install the Anaconda distribution, you will get Jupyter Notebooks installed as part of it. What's really misleading though is that there's this little icon that says Jupyter Notebooks. You're like, I click on it and nothing happens because nothing will, which is annoying. You have to actually go to this command prompt and type in Jupyter Notebook or it won't work.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you very much for having the icon because it doesn't do anything for you. And then it depends on how you learn. If you are a person who learns from books, if you learn from classes, one thing that a lot of classes that I've seen, they kind of blow off the installation process that's required. That's a problem when you do things in environments that you just have to kind of, because there are a number of different formats. I know DataCamp, they have an environment, so you don't have to, you're stepped away from that. And I think it is really important to get involved in what's required on your machine, because let's face it, when you're done, that matters.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
So yeah, I would look at doing a class, or there's a number of really good books. When you are doing Python, it's very important to specify what you're doing it for, because it's such a universal language that people do a lot of stuff with it that has nothing to do with data. And if you're looking around, you may find a whole bunch of Python stuff that is nothing to be what you'd want to do. I would also not start out with TensorFlow because that's too hard.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, we've just had another question that's come in. I don't know whether F. Puma is aware of my love of Golang, but he asks, how do you install Go programming? So I think he means, is Jupyter Notebooks, does it have a snap-in or something for Golang?
Yes, it does.
Wow.
It does have one for Golang. I don't know because I don't run it, but I can tell you that I did the R one, and with R, all I did was I basically looked up R kernel for Jupyter Notebooks, and that's kernel with a K, and I got the instructions for doing it to installing the kernel, and I did that in R, and then it was available within Jupyter Notebooks. I would assume that the same thing is true for Go.
Yeah,
because it is available.
Okay, excellent.
So,
I'll take a look.
You could definitely do that. Yeah, then you can tell me how to do it with Go, because I
don't know Go.
I'll
do my best. All right.
Blog post in there.
Yeah, sure.